I'm Jessica, 38. At my sister's engagement dinner, I was the one slicing strawberries in the kitchen while she toasted champagne under chandeliers. She had introduced me to her guests as my kind sister who's staying over to help with the kids. That night, while they laughed and posed for photos, I tucked my niece into bed. I didn't expect anything more. Until her fiancé pulled me aside and said, "My father always wondered about the woman who saved his life." 5 years ago, I had dragged a stranger from a parking lot, called for help, and disappeared without a name. That stranger was Edward Bennett, founder of the nation's largest private hospital chain. The next night, in a room full of people who once laughed at my silence, he walked in, looked at me, and said, "That woman is my lifesaver." Rachel's smile broke. The cameras kept flashing. And I realized sometimes the people who belittle you in private will learn your worth when someone powerful names it out loud. The text came on a Thursday night while I was still in my scrubs, halfway through reheating leftover stir-fry. "Don't forget Rachel's engagement party. The invitation is in the mail." I stared at the message from my mother, rereading it, like maybe the words would shift into something warmer the second time around. They didn't. That night, when I got home from my shift at Seattle General, there was a small cream envelope waiting in the pile of flyers and unpaid bills. My name wasn't on it. It wasn't even addressed properly. Just Morgan Residence scribbled like an afterthought. I opened it anyway. It was beautiful, of course. Gold-trimmed embossed lettering, the kind of expensive stationery you only see in catalogs or weddings featured in lifestyle magazines. Rachel Morgan and Marcus Bennett. A private celebration in East Bay. Black tie, adults only. No +1. No child mentioned. No acknowledgement that I, Jessica Morgan, was the one raising the child she left behind. Lily, 4 years old, had fallen asleep with one sock halfway off and a blue marker streaked across her cheek. I brushed a loose curl away from her forehead and pulled the blanket up over her small shoulders. She murmured something soft, maybe a dream or a memory, and curled tighter into the pillow. I looked at the invitation again. Not even a scribble of my name. No RSVP card, just the assumption that I'd show up. Or maybe the quiet hope that I wouldn't. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen sipping coffee that had long gone cold while Lily stacked her cereal rings into a leaning tower of colors. She wore her usual sparkly purple tutu and an old t-shirt of mine tied in a knot at her waist. Her voice broke my spiral. "Are we gonna see Auntie Rachel soon?" I hesitated. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." Rachel hadn't spoken to me in nearly 7 months. Not a text, not a call. The last conversation we had was when she demanded the hospital birth certificate for Lily, even though I was the emergency contact, the one who'd stayed up with Lily's fevers and comforted her night terrors and packed her peanut-free lunches every single morning. Rachel left the hospital the day after giving birth with a vague excuse about needing space. She never came back. I filed for temporary guardianship 3 months later. She didn't contest it. She didn't even show up to the hearing. I'd let it go. For Lily's sake, for my own peace. But the idea that Rachel was parading around in designer heels planning a luxury engagement party while I was working doubles just to keep the lights on made something clench deep in my gut. Still, I didn't say anything. I packed a bag for both of us, folding Lily's little dresses carefully next to my one nice dress that still fit. I printed directions to the East Bay estate listed on the invite, then tucked the invitation back into the envelope, creased and fingerprinted now. I left a message with Dr. Renner at the hospital letting him know I'd be out for the weekend. No, not a vacation. Family event. Sort of. Lily sang made-up songs in the backseat the entire drive down. I watched the mountains turn into valleys and the skyline bleed into wide suburban estates. The Bennett estate sat behind 2 wrought iron gates surrounded by cypress trees trimmed so perfectly it looked like someone had photoshopped the landscape. At the front, a valet took the keys without asking my name. I wasn't on any list. But no one stopped me either. Maybe that was worse. Rachel spotted us from the top of the steps. Her hair was perfectly blown out in soft waves, her white jumpsuit crisp and unwrinkled, her lips the exact shade of hibiscus red that only high-end stores carry. She looked like she belonged in a Vogue editorial. I looked like I'd just driven 5 hours with a 4-year-old and 2 cups of gas station coffee. She walked down slowly. Not a hug. Not a smile. You brought her. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it wasn't warm either. She's your daughter. Rachel glanced behind her as if double-checking that no one was close enough to overhear. Jessica, this isn't really the place for that. I crouched down to Lily's level. Why don't you go meet the peacocks, honey? I saw one on the way in. Lily squealed and ran toward the garden. Rachel crossed her arms. You could have just sent her to Mom's for the weekend. I came too, I said. Why you invited me, remember? She blinked. I didn't send that. Figures. She sighed and rubbed her temples, already bored of the conversation. I'm kind of in the middle of everything right now. Marcus's family is here and, you mean the family whose father I saved? I didn't say that out loud. I smiled tightly instead. Where should we stay? Guest room's full. There's a staff wing. Ask Gina to set it up. I found Gina a housekeeper with kind eyes and tired shoulders who led us down a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old carpet. The room was clean but plain. No view. No air conditioning. A fold-out couch and a bathroom that needed a new light bulb. Lily didn't mind. She bounced on the couch like it was a trampoline. I sat down beside her watching the ceiling fan squeak with every rotation. I tried to remember why I came. Not for Rachel, not for anyone else in that mansion. Just for the little girl beside me. The one who still called me Mommy Jess when she was scared at night. She climbed into my lap and pressed her cheek to mine. I'm glad we're here. I didn't answer. I just held her tighter, letting the weight of everything settle into the quiet hum of the fan above us. The air in the room turned still as the fan slowed to a lazy whirl and Lily's breathing evened out against my chest. I eased her off my lap and tucked her in with the one extra blanket folded at the foot of the couch. Then I walked to the tiny bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. The mirror above the sink was foggy and cracked at the corner. I looked like I'd been on call for 3 nights straight. Maybe I had. Outside the window, fairy lights glowed along the garden path, casting soft halos around the hedges and statues. The estate was stunning. Just not for people like me. By the time we made our way back to the main house for dinner, the sun had dipped below the hills. The foyer buzzed with voices, laughter, clinking glasses. A string quartet played in the courtyard and servers floated through the space with trays of champagne and tiny canapes I couldn't pronounce. Rachel stood near the fireplace, radiant and poised like she'd walked out of a bridal catalog. Her white silk dress clung in all the right places, her earrings sparkled like icicles, and her smile was the sharp, polished kind that never quite reached her eyes. Marcus Bennett was beside her, tall, clean-cut, every bit the federal prosecutor he was known to be. His suit looked custom, his watch gleamed under the lights. When our eyes met, he gave a courteous nod. Nothing more. Not rude, not warm. Just professional. I guided Lily into the kitchen away from the noise, hoping to find somewhere quiet to feed her. A young staffer directed me to the back kitchen, far from the formal dining area. The space smelled like roasted vegetables and burnt sugar. I sat Lily at a corner table with a bowl of pasta and cut-up fruit I had brought, hoping no one would mind. A few minutes later, Rachel floated in. Oh, you're still here. I turned, keeping my expression neutral. Just grabbing dinner for Lily. She glanced at the bowl on the table, then at the staffer behind me. We've got truffle risotto and beet carpaccio in the main hall, but I guess this works too. Lily didn't look up. She was focused on her fork, chewing carefully. Rachel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. So still at the public hospital? I nodded once. Seattle General. She smiled tight and sharp. Still working yourself to the bone for 80-hour weeks and terrible coffee. You should really think about switching careers. Influencer moms make a fortune now. Or maybe family assistant. Her tone was light, like it was just a joke, but her eyes searched mine, waiting for a reaction. I didn't give her one. She glanced toward Lily. Does she still wet the bed? Lily looked up, then eyes wide. I set my hand on Lily's back gently and stood. She's doing just fine. Rachel shrugged. Just saying, I saw a video on TikTok about night terrors and attachment issues in kids raised by non-biological guardians. Wild stuff. I didn't flinch. Helen entered then in a deep navy gown that looked like it had been steamed minutes before. Her hair was pulled back tight, not a strand out of place. She looked like someone used to giving instructions and having them followed. "Jessica, darling, come join us at the table." "You too, sweet girl." Before I could respond, Rachel added smoothly, "Mom, I think the staff has a table for them set up in the side kitchen. It's quieter. Probably better for Lily." "Right, Jess," I didn't answer. Lily had already started gathering her things. Helen hesitated, then smiled. "Of course. Whatever's most comfortable." As we walked out, Rachel's voice followed, soft but sharp. "Make sure she doesn't spill. These rugs are antique." Back in the smaller kitchen, a folding table had been set up near the supply shelves. No tablecloth, just paper napkins and a single plastic cup of water. I sat across from Lily, helping her cut the rest of her pasta. She was quiet through most of the meal. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between us. I studied her little hands, the way she always sorted her grapes by color before eating them. Her eyes stayed, low, shoulders slightly hunched. "Do you like your food, sweetheart?" She nodded without looking up. After a minute she whispered, "Why did Aunt Rachel say I don't belong?" I froze for a moment, then reached across the table to take her hand. She didn't mean that, but she looked sad when she saw me. I squeezed her fingers gently. People sometimes act strange when they're nervous. Aunt Rachel's getting married, and that makes people say things they don't really mean. Lily blinked up at me. "Do I get to come to the wedding?" I opened my mouth. Closed it. Then tried again. "We'll see, baby. I'll be with you, okay?" She nodded, but the light had gone out of her eyes. Later that evening, after Lily had fallen asleep curled up against my side on the fold-out couch, I stepped outside for air. The night was cool, the crickets loud. Somewhere beyond the hedges, laughter echoed from the main house. I stood there for a while, looking up at the stars, wondering how many more of these events I'd be quietly erased from. Wondering what it would take for someone in that house to see me not as the responsible older sister, not as the babysitter, not as the woman with calloused hands and no designer dress, but as someone who mattered. I didn't have an answer yet, but something inside me had shifted, and it wasn't going back. The sound of footsteps on gravel made me turn. Marcus stood at the edge of the patio, one hand tucked into his pocket, the other holding a half-empty glass. He nodded once, not quite a greeting, more like a request. "Do you mind stepping out into the garden? Just for a few minutes." His tone was polite, but something about the way he avoided looking directly at me made my stomach knot. I followed him through the open archway into the garden. The night air was cooler out here, scented faintly with lavender and wet earth. The path curved through neatly trimmed hedges and around a small fountain. We stopped near a stone bench under an old oak tree. Marcus didn't sit. About 5 years ago he started. I remember my father collapsed outside St. Clair's Hospital. You wouldn't know this, but that day changed everything. My pulse slowed. I didn't say anything. He looked down at the gravel for a moment, then back at me. He always talked about the woman who saved him. Said she came out of nowhere, started CPR before anyone else noticed. That if she hadn't acted so fast, he wouldn't have made it. She didn't stay. Didn't give her name. Just vanished. My breath caught, but I didn't respond. We pulled the hospital's exterior camera footage, but the image was grainy. Dad would replay it like a ghost story. A woman in scrubs, dark ponytail, moving fast. That was all we had. He paused again. "Last week when Rachel showed me the guest list for this weekend, I saw your name. And something clicked. My throat was dry. I didn't mean to keep it from him," I finally said. Or from anyone. That day was chaos. Rachel had gone into early labor. Her blood pressure was spiking. Lily was in distress. I was rushing her into the ER when I saw a man drop near the parking lot. I told a nurse to get a crash cart, started compressions, and waited until the paramedics came. But I couldn't stay. Rachel needed me. Marcus was quiet for a long time. The wind shifted slightly, rustling the branches overhead. "You're the reason he's alive." I shook my head. Number. I was just in the right place at the right time. He studied me, then eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion, but with something softer, almost unsure. He never forgot you. He said he wanted to meet you someday. Thank you in person. I looked away, unsure what to say. Does Rachel know? No, I said quickly. And I don't plan to tell her. This was never about recognition. It was just what needed to be done. His brow furrowed, but he didn't push. We stood there in the quiet for a few more moments. I could hear laughter drifting from the house again, the clink of glasses, the rising hum of music. You don't have to stay in that guest room, Marcus said suddenly. I didn't realize they'd put you out there. It's fine. It's not. I appreciate it, but I'm not here for comfort. He nodded once, almost reluctantly. Just as we turned to head back toward the house, a small figure darted across the lawn. Mommy Jess. Lily ran into my legs, wrapping her arms tight around my thighs, her little cheeks flushed from sleep. Her curls were wild, her pajama shirt crooked, one sock missing. I crouched and pulled her into a hug. What are you doing out of bed, sweetheart? She looked up, blinking. I heard voices. I thought you left me. I kissed the top of her head. Never. She nestled into my neck, and I stood holding her. Marcus had gone still. His eyes flicked from Lily's face to mine. I saw it hit him then. Something in the way his jaw tightened. The recognition. The unspoken question. You're raising her. I nodded. Rachel wasn't ready. And I couldn't let her grow up not knowing someone loved her from the start. He didn't speak, just kept watching us. Lily leaned her head on my shoulder and yawned. You don't have to explain anything, he said quietly after a moment. But I think I'm starting to understand a few things. We walked back toward the patio in silence. Behind us, the fountain kept bubbling soft and steady. Lily's breathing slowed again, calm and safe against my shoulder. I didn't look back, neither did he. The morning sun cast a golden sheen across the veranda, and I sat quietly on a bench near the back garden sipping lukewarm coffee while Lily played with a plush bunny in the grass. A distant hum of chatter floated from the main house. Inside, the party machine had started again. Rachel was posing by the floral archway, hair styled into perfect waves, champagne glass in hand. Photographers hovered like moths around her. Every move choreographed, every smile polished. The sparkle in her earrings was probably worth more than my car. Marcus stood beside her, one hand resting at his side, the other in his pocket, answering questions from a guest with polite disinterest. His eyes drifted now and then, scanning the crowd. He didn't find what he was looking for, Rachel noticed. She leaned into Helen, who sat perched in a cushioned chair under the tent. I don't like the way he looks at her, she whispered. Helen didn't even blink. Then you make sure he sees her clearly. That afternoon, Rachel gathered her closest friends in the lounge room. Gold lettering on a felt sign read, "Welcome to Rachel's Circle." I wasn't invited, of course, but Lily had wandered off chasing a balloon, and I followed her in just as Rachel tapped her wine glass. Ladies, she began, thank you for coming. Before we dive into the rose tasting, I wanted to share something personal. You all know my older sister, Jessica. She's here helping out with Lily, which is so generous of her. Honestly, I don't know how she does it working at a public hospital all those years. There were polite chuckles. I stayed near the wall behind a row of flower arrangements. Lily stood beside me, holding my hand tightly. Rachel clicked a remote, and the flat screen flickered to life. A grainy video played. A younger me dressed in scrubs, hair pulled back messily, stood outside a community center handing out boxed meals to a line of homeless families. My face flushed with sweat, voice firm as I coordinated volunteers. The camera panned, catching me handing a juice box to a crying toddler, then lifting a crate into a van. Rachel grinned. This was from 5 years ago. Jess used to do these little charity pop-ups. She was always helping someone, bless her heart. She looked at me then, that smile dipped in venom. Always had a thing for showing up where she wasn't asked. A ripple of laughter passed through the room. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. Lily leaned her head into my side. One of Rachel's friends, a woman in a mauve silk jumpsuit, turned to whisper something to another guest, eyes flicking toward me. Marcus stepped through the open archway behind them. He hadn't been there a moment ago, but now he stood at the edge of the room, jaw tight, gaze locked on the screen. Rachel's eyes followed his. She turned off the video. "Anyway," she said, pouring wine into a guest's glass, "we're lucky to have her here this week. Even if she's a little camera shy." Marcus walked in silent. He crossed the room, bypassing the circle entirely, and stopped in front of me. "Jessica, can I talk to you?" My hands curled gently around Lily's. "Now," he nodded. We stepped outside into the hallway just past the view of Rachel's little event. His expression was hard to read. "That video," he said slowly, "that was low. I didn't expect." "She's always had a gift," I said, "for reframing things." He looked down the hallway. "Does she always do that? Treat you like you're less?" I shrugged. "It's not always this theatrical. Sometimes it's quieter. Polite suggestions. Redirection. The occasional reminder that I'm the cautionary tale." He ran a hand through his hair. "That video showed someone working harder than anyone in that room." I sighed. "It was just a food drive. I didn't even know someone filmed it." He was quiet for a beat, then said, "You were carrying Lily in that last frame. She was so small. She was 5 pounds when she was born. Could barely breathe on her own. Her mother didn't want to touch her. And you did." "I did everything." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." He didn't say anything else, just walked back inside, his back stiff. From the doorway, I caught Rachel watching us. She tried to smile, but it was strained. Her eyes flicked to Marcus, then back to me. Lily reached up, wrapping her arms around my leg. I bent down and picked her up. "You tired?" She nodded. "Let's go find some quiet." The hallway smelled like fresh paint and roses, too sweet and too fake. But in the guest room by the storage closet, the air was still and real. No cameras. No stage lights. I closed the door behind us. I pressed my back gently against the door and waited for the soft click to settle in the silence. Marcus stood in the center of the room, the low light casting his profile in angles I hadn't noticed before. He looked like he was bracing for something. Lily's quiet breathing filled the space between us, steady and rhythmic from her small bed tucked in the corner. I didn't move. Neither did he. "You said you had questions." I kept my voice low. He nodded and ran a hand through his hair. "I've been trying to understand why no one ever mentioned you. Rachel talks about Lily like she's just a cute family story. But tonight when Lily called you Mommy Jess, I realized something doesn't add up." I took a seat on the chair beside the bed, careful not to wake her. "She doesn't call me that in front of Rachel, or Helen. She knows better. That's part of what worries me," he said. "That a 4-year-old already knows what parts of her love she has to hide." I felt the sting of those words settle in the space behind my eyes. I looked down at Lily, then back up at him. "She wasn't supposed to survive, you know. She was born at 31 weeks. 2 pounds 14 ounces. Rachel hadn't gone to a single prenatal appointment. She was at some influencer retreat in Utah when her water broke." He sat on the armrest across from me, elbows on his knees. "Rachel told me Lily was born early, but she said it was a complication, not neglect." I almost laughed. "She left the hospital 2 days after delivery. Signed nothing. Didn't even ask what the doctor said. Helen handled the paperwork and told them to call me if there were updates. And they did. I was already there. Rachel called me mid-labor, sobbing and terrified, said she didn't know what to do. I drove her to St. Jude's and stayed through the whole thing. She was screaming, furious, blaming everyone but herself. And after Lily came, she refused to touch her. Wouldn't even look. I held her first. Fed her through a tube, learned how to check her O2 levels. The nurses thought I was her mother. I didn't correct them." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said softly, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because Rachel was still family. I thought maybe if I gave her space, she'd come around. I didn't want to shame her publicly. I thought protecting Lily meant protecting her image too." He exhaled hard. "My dad's going to want to talk to you." I glanced at him. "Your father?" "Why?" "Because he's been looking for you for 5 years." I blinked. "I don't even know your dad." "Yes, you do. You saved his life. The words landed in my chest like a dropped stone. I stared at him, waiting for a punchline that didn't come. 5 years ago, Marcus said my father collapsed outside St. Jude's. He had a major coronary. EMTs said someone had already started chest compressions by the time they arrived. No ID on the Good Samaritan. No name. Just a woman in scrubs who disappeared after shouting instructions. I swallowed hard. I remember that. It was the day I brought Rachel in. I saw a man collapse in the parking lot and instinct kicked in. I started compressions, but once the ambulance came, I had to run. Rachel was screaming in labor inside. I never even got his name. Edward Bennett, Marcus said. My father. Billionaire investor. Retired now, but still sharper than anyone I know. He's told that story more times than I can count. Always wondered who that woman was. My breath caught. I didn't know. I was just trying to help. You did. He survived because of you. They said if it had been even 2 minutes later, he'd be gone. Marcus leaned forward, searching my face. And now you're here being treated like an unpaid nanny while my fiancé pretends you're just some background character in her highlight reel. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. He stood pacing slowly. You work at a public hospital. Raise a child that isn't yours. Let your sister take the credit. Why? Because Lily deserves better. Because I couldn't live with myself knowing she was passed around like a burden. Because I was already bonded to her by the time I signed the custody paperwork. You have full custody. I nodded. Helen signed the release forms. Rachel never even showed up to court. He rubbed his jaw. And you've been doing all this alone, mostly. I mean, I have a couple close friends who helped in the early years, but it's been me and Lily for the most part. Daycare, midnight ear infections, first day of preschool. All me. He looked like he was trying to absorb the weight of it piece by piece. I need to call my dad, he said. He needs to hear this from me before anyone else twists it. I nodded slowly. He won't remember me. But that's not why I did it. I know. That's exactly why he needs to know. As he pulled out his phone, I stood and crossed the room to Lily's bed. She shifted slightly in her sleep, then settled again, her hand still holding tightly to the worn ear of her bunny. Marcus moved toward the door, paused, and looked back. Jess, thank you. Not just for him. For Lily. I smiled faintly, brushing a curl off her forehead. She saved me too, you know. He watched us a moment longer, then left the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and I stayed there beside her, my hand resting lightly on her blanket. I could feel the tide turning, though I didn't know yet which shore it would carry us to. I stayed with Lily until her breathing deepened into the kind of sleep that children fall into when they know someone safe is near. Then I slipped out of the room and changed into the same light blue dress I had worn earlier, brushed my hair, and took one last look in the mirror. My reflection didn't look like someone invited to a celebration. It looked like someone preparing for weather. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, painting the sky over Napa in pale gold. String lights flickered across the garden as guests moved toward the long tables arranged near the pergola. Champagne flowed. Camera shutters clicked. And Rachel, in a dress that sparkled with every step, stood in the center like she had designed the whole event to orbit around her. I kept to the edge of the crowd, mostly unseen, which was how she preferred me. Lily was with one of the nannies now, her curls tied back with the ribbon I'd sewn into her dress. She smiled at me from across the lawn. Rachel tapped her champagne glass, and the soft clinking echoed until conversations died down. Her voice rose with rehearsed warmth. Thank you all for being here to celebrate love, legacy, and family. I'm so grateful for every one of you who's shaped my journey. Especially my fiancé and, of course, my incredible mother Helen for being my backbone and my biggest believer. No mention of me. Not even a nod. I felt Marcus watching her as she spoke. Not with admiration, but with something harder to name. Maybe suspicion. Maybe disappointment. She lifted her glass higher. To the ones who matter most. A pause, then applause. Not from me. Marcus stood. He didn't wait for anyone to hand him a mic. His voice carried on its own calm and firm. If I could have a moment, I just want to say something, not about myself, about someone else. The clinking stopped. Conversations halted again. Even Rachel's smile faltered. 5 years ago, my father nearly died. Outside St. Jude's Medical Center. He collapsed in a parking lot and would not have made it if a stranger hadn't acted faster than anyone else. She didn't leave a name, just walked away after saving him. People murmured, confused. Rachel's brows drew in slightly. Tonight I found out who that person is. And she's here. The garden held its breath. Before he could go on, there was movement at the gate. A hush spread like mist as a man stepped through, supported slightly by a cane but every inch of him composed. He wore a gray suit, tailored and understated, and his presence alone made the evening shift. Edward Bennett, founder of Meridian Health Systems, a name that opened doors and ended negotiations. No one had seen him in public since his retirement 2 years earlier. I froze. His eyes swept the crowd past the influencers and CEOs and polished guests, then stopped. On me. You're the one who saved my life. His voice was not loud, but the silence was so complete it traveled. He stepped closer. I never thought I'd find you. My son said you were here, but I needed to see for myself. He turned toward the crowd, then back to me. This woman is my lifesaver. People turned, whispered, glanced back at Rachel, confused. She looked like a portrait cracking at the edges. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted toward Helen, who had gone pale. Edward faced her directly. You mock this woman. Do you even know who she is? Rachel finally found her voice brittle and high. Dad, I didn't mean anything. She's my sister. It was a joke. Edward looked at her with tired eyes. There are jokes. And there are wounds dressed up as humor. He turned back to me. I owe you my life, and now I find out you're raising a child who's not even yours. That takes more than medicine. That takes character. Rachel opened her mouth again, but Marcus stepped forward first. Dad, we'll talk later. Edward didn't answer. He just walked over slowly and placed a hand on my shoulder. You changed my life. And I don't forget people who do that. The weight of the moment pressed on every corner of the garden. Guests stared. Some lowered their phones. Others whispered into champagne glasses. Helen reached for Rachel's hand, but she pulled away. Somewhere across the lawn, I caught Lily's eyes again. She beamed, unaware of the shift in gravity. And just like that, a storm that had hovered for years finally moved. Rachel's smile faltered for the first time all evening. Her lips twitched upward, but her eyes had already betrayed her. I watched her chest rise and fall in uneven rhythm as the room around us fell into a thick, electrified silence. Edward didn't move to sit. He stood with quiet authority, the kind of presence that came not from money but from surviving something no amount of it could fix. His voice remained calm, but there was weight behind every word. I lost a daughter once. He didn't look at Rachel. He looked past her, his eyes settling on Lily. The one who saved my life is the woman who raised the child you left behind. Gasps scattered across the room like a ripple. Rachel's face went pale, her fingers tightening around the edge of her champagne glass. Helen stepped forward, voice tentative. We didn't know. We were. Edward raised a hand. Not knowing is a choice. Dismissing someone's worth is also a choice. Rachel's fiancé Marcus didn't say a word. Instead, he moved quietly to stand next to me. He didn't touch me, didn't say anything, just stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence like a shield. Lily pressed her face into my shoulder, and I lowered my voice just for her. It's okay. We're okay. I wasn't sure I believed it. But the weight of that sentence steadied my voice. Helen tried again. Jessica has always been difficult. She kept things from us. She didn't even tell us she brought Lily to live with her. Edward's eyes sharpened. You didn't ask. Silence returned deeper this time. A soft mechanical click sounded to our left. A guest near the fireplace was filming. They lowered their phone the moment they saw Edward's gaze land on them, but the damage was already done. The moment was out there now, digital and permanent. Rachel's eyes darted around the room like a hunted animal. Some guests looked down at their shoes. Others stared openly. A few, mostly older, folded their arms across their chests with a mix of suspicion and judgment. I turned toward Marcus. You didn't have to stand here, you know. I know, he said, still not looking away from the guests. Rachel finally spoke. She forced a laugh, brittle and too loud. This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't know Jessica saved your life, Mr. Bennett. And Lily, well, we were young. Things were complicated. Edward turned slowly to face her. She's your daughter. Rachel blinked, the words seeming to land too late. He didn't shout, he didn't accuse. But somehow the quietness of his voice made it worse. I heard Lily's soft breath against my ear, her small hand still gripping my dress. A woman in a gold dress whispered to her partner. He nodded and tapped at his phone. I saw it in real time, the way stories like this unfold in our world now. The glances, the murmurs, the need to search for context before the context even finishes speaking. Helen's voice rose in a brittle attempt to reclaim control. Let's all calm down. This is a celebration after all. Edward turned back toward the crowd. Then celebrate something worth honoring. A woman who chose kindness when she had nothing to gain. A child who was abandoned and found a home anyway. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Marcus finally spoke. My father told me someone saved his life. For years he didn't know who she was. We thought it was just a passing moment, someone doing the right thing and disappearing. But now I see it wasn't just that. It was a pattern. Jessica didn't just save him, she saved Lily. She saved a family and never asked for recognition. Rachel tried to interrupt, but her voice cracked. I moved slightly, adjusting Lily on my hip. You never told me, Marcus said, his voice directed at Rachel now. That Jessica raised Lily. That she stepped in when no one else would. Rachel's face tightened. She's not Lily's mother, maybe not by blood, he said, but she's the only one who acted like it. Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her shoulders slumped. A guest near the back of the room muttered something and someone laughed nervously. The tension in the air shifted again, this time not in Rachel's favor. Helen stepped toward Edward. I think this has gone far enough. You've made your point. Have I? Edward asked almost kindly. Or have you only just begun to listen? Then he turned to me. Thank you, for what you did. For what you continue to do. You may not realize it, but you gave me a second chance. And my son, he's lucky to know you. He reached out to gently pat Lily's head. She looked up at him and smiled sleepily. Rachel stood frozen, still clutching her glass like it was the last thing tethering her to the room. Edward moved to sit down finally. The storm had passed. But the wreckage that was just beginning to show. I could feel the eyes now. All of them. Watching me differently than before. Not with pity, not with confusion. But with something else. Recognition. It started with a 30-second clip. A shaky phone video caught from behind the floral arrangements zoomed just enough to show Rachel's frozen smile and Edward Bennett's quiet fury. The sound was clear enough to catch every word. By the next morning it was everywhere. The headline on the local news station read, Future Bride Humiliates Father-in-Law's Lifesaver. By lunchtime, a Reddit thread had already gone viral with thousands of comments dissecting every frame. TikTok creators made dramatic reenactments. Twitter lit up with hashtags. The image of Rachel standing speechless while Edward turned to me had been turned into a meme within hours. I turned off my phone after the 5th voicemail from a stranger. I didn't want to hear it. The praise, the judgment, the curiosity. I didn't want any of it. Lily sat at the kitchen table in her pajamas, eating a bowl of cereal shaped like stars. She had no idea what was happening, only that school was still on break and that we were back in our little apartment in Tacoma, safe and familiar. Rachel's company, Clarabelle Beauty, issued a brief statement claiming misunderstanding and regret. But by then, dozens of influencers had already pulled their sponsorship. An open letter signed by several women's advocacy groups called for a boycott, citing her treatment of both a caregiver and a child. Rachel tried to post an apology video, tears perfectly glistening on her cheekbones, but it was quickly dissected by users who noticed she still hadn't once said my name. Marcus called me later that afternoon. I didn't pick up the first time, or the second. But on the third I answered. He didn't say much, just that he had ended the engagement. That he was sorry for not asking more questions sooner. That he had spoken with his father and understood things now in a way he hadn't before. I told him thank you. Then I asked for space. It wasn't that I didn't believe him, I did. But I needed to breathe on my own again, not be pulled into someone else's mess no matter how gently they offered to carry me through it. Helen, meanwhile, published a blog post titled "What It Feels Like to Be a Misunderstood Mother." She posted old photos of Rachel and me as children, carefully captioned to suggest warmth that had long since evaporated. She painted herself as the victim of online cruelty, a woman caught between daughters and generations. The response was not what she hoped for. The comments filled with screenshots from the video clips from her own interviews and calls for accountability. A former teacher from our high school even chimed in, recalling a time Helen had dismissed my science award as a fluke and praised Rachel's homecoming dress instead. I didn't comment. I didn't share. I just closed the tab and turned back to Lily, who was drawing a picture of the two of us in a park. A few days later, a heavy cream envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a letter handwritten in precise, steady script. "Jessica, this is for Lily. She deserves every opportunity. Let this be the first. Sincerely, Edward Bennett." Tucked beside the note was an official certificate of a full academic scholarship, valid from elementary through college. Any school of her choosing. Books, tuition, travel covered. I cried quietly in the kitchen, away from Lily's curious eyes. I didn't call Edward. Not yet. I needed to think. To decide whether I was accepting a gift or a chain. The media frenzy lasted about a week before something newer and flashier came along. But the damage lingered. Rachel's investors backed out of her expansion plans. Her Instagram comment sections were turned off. And last I heard, she had gone private on all platforms. She didn't reach out. Neither did Helen. That silence for once didn't sting. One afternoon while Lily was napping, Marcus texted. Just a single message. "Still here. No pressure." I looked at it for a long time before replying. I need to know who I am when no one's looking at me. Give me time. He didn't push. Just sent back a small note saying he understood. The apartment felt still again. No cameras, no whispers. No champagne flutes or forced smiles. Just me. A woman who had chosen to stay when it was easier to leave. Who had held a baby on her chest and whispered it's okay even when it wasn't. Who had walked into a party uninvited, not to make a statement, but because the child she loved needed to know someone would show up. That night I lay beside Lily as she drifted off to sleep. Her small hand curled in mine, her breath warm against my arm. Outside, a winter wind stirred through the alleyway, brushing against the window panes. It felt quieter than before. But not empty. Never empty again. Under gray skies and a light February drizzle, she knocked on my door. I had just finished cleaning up Lily's breakfast when I heard it. Not urgent, just persistent. I opened it to find Helen standing on the steps, umbrella tucked under one arm, a folder clutched tightly to her chest. She looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the wind or the way she didn't meet my eyes right away. Her coat was elegant, her makeup subtle, but the mask she wore at every garden party and charity gala had finally slipped. She asked to come in. I didn't move. She took a breath and held out the folder. Inside were printed forms. Guardianship transfer requests. Her name. Rachel's name. Boxes already checked. Signatures waiting. She said Rachel was struggling. That she was getting counseling. That the company might recover with time. That this would help. That Lily would be more secure with money and opportunities and a proper future. I stared at her. My hand never touched the folder. "You want me to give her up?" Helen blinked. I could see her jaw tense. "I just think Rachel deserves a chance to rebuild. She's been through a lot. So has Lily." Her lips parted. She tried to smile. "Jessica, we're family. Number. We're not. Not in the way that matters." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door. I just handed the folder back and said, "Lily is not a product. Not a brand. Not an apology you can gift wrap." Helen's hand hovered in the air like she wanted to say something more. Then she lowered it. "Rachel's lost everything." I nodded once. She lost it by stepping on people she thought would never rise. Helen looked away then. Down the hall toward the sound of Lily humming to herself in the living room. She said nothing more before turning and walking out. I closed the door softly behind her. That night Lily drew a picture with her crayons. The paper was filled with bright purples and sky blues. Two figures stood side by side, one tall with dark brown hair, the other small with pigtails. She brought it to me beaming. "That's me and you, Mama Jess." I blinked hard but smiled. "Where's everybody else?" She shrugged. "Just us." I hugged her tighter than I meant to. She giggled and squirmed but didn't pull away. The following week I submitted an application to teach part-time at the University of Washington School of Medicine. I had missed teaching. Missed the feeling of minds opening under steady hands and honest conversations. I wanted to return not just to the profession but to a version of myself I had left behind when Lily was a baby and the world felt too fragile to re-enter. On Wednesday morning, a news anchor on the radio announced the latest updates in the Bennett Rivers scandal. Rachel's former PR manager had released screenshots of internal memos blaming emotional distraction for the wedding disaster. Internet sleuths uncovered past incidents of workplace bullying and misuse of foundation funds. Her name was now more associated with public disgrace than beauty. Marcus's name was notably absent from any of it. He had quietly withdrawn his shares from the joint holdings, canceled the wedding license, and donated a portion of the event's remaining budget to local pediatric care programs. A small statement released through his father's foundation simply read, "We hold ourselves to a higher standard. We must always begin with truth." He hadn't reached out again since my last message. And I was grateful for that. Not because I didn't want to speak with him, but because I needed the quiet. The kind of silence that came with choosing your own rhythm again. One afternoon, as Lily napped under a sunbeam on the couch, I found myself sorting through her old clothes, tiny shoes she'd outgrown, onesies with faint milk stains, the baby blanket she used to grip in her sleep. I folded them slowly, reverently, like the pages of a book that would never fully close. I thought about the woman who gave birth to her and walked away. I wondered if Rachel truly understood the weight of that decision, or if she still thought it had been temporary, something she could someday edit or revise. You don't get to be a mother because you gave birth. You become one by staying. That night, Lily helped me set the table for dinner. She lined up the forks with more precision than necessary, her little brow furrowed in concentration. "You're gonna be a doctor again, maybe. A teacher too. Will I come with you?" "Of course," I said. "Always." She nodded like that was the answer she expected, then went back to arranging the spoons. There were still bills to manage. Still late-night doubts and memories that crept in when the apartment was too still. But there was also laughter now. Real deep belly laughter when Lily told a knock-knock joke she barely understood. There were bedtime stories, scraped knees, surprise hugs. There was something whole taking shape, and it was ours. The invitation came in a cream-colored envelope, thick and formal. It was embossed with the Bennett Foundation seal and a handwritten note from Edward Bennett himself asking me to speak at their annual humanitarian awards ceremony. I read it 3 times before setting it down beside the toaster. Lily asked if it was something important. I just smiled and told her I wasn't sure yet. The event was scheduled for the end of the month at the Seattle Civic Center. I wasn't used to being the one on stage. I spent my life behind curtains in quiet hallways, kneeling beside stretchers or calming children with fevers. But after everything, something inside me whispered that maybe it was time to stand still and speak. When I arrived that evening, I wore a navy blue dress I had found on clearance and polished the same shoes I wore to my residency graduation. The lights inside the venue were soft and golden. A string quartet played in the corner and waitstaff moved gracefully among clusters of board members, doctors, and community workers. I noticed Edward standing near the podium. He looked healthier than when I had first met him in the ER. Stronger, more grounded. When he spotted me, he walked over and gave a small nod. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. I nodded back. "Thank you for inviting me." The ceremony began with a few opening remarks, a video tribute to community healthcare workers, and an award presented to a rural clinic team in Montana. Then, Edward stepped forward again and introduced me, though he kept it brief. No titles, no backstory. Just my name and a thank you for my service. As I walked to the microphone, I felt my palms dampen. I looked out at the crowd, a sea of attentive faces. I spotted Lily near the back with one of the volunteers holding a juice box and kicking her feet under her seat. I took a breath. When people think of heroes, they picture grand gestures. Capes, spotlights, applause. But the truth is, most heroes move quietly. They show up early, stay late, listen without interrupting. They pick up the phone at midnight. They sit with patients who have no family. They change sheets, hold hands. They choose the harder road every single day. I paused, letting the room breathe with me. You don't have to be powerful to change a life. You just have to be present. I have seen janitors change the mood of an entire ward. I have seen patients uplift their nurses. I have seen children give purpose to adults who thought they had none left. The extraordinary hides inside the ordinary. Always. I didn't mention Rachel. I didn't mention the past. That night wasn't about wounds or revenge. It was about the quiet resilience that lives in everyone who chooses to care. When I stepped down, the applause felt warm, not loud. It wasn't praise, it was acknowledgement. Edward met me at the bottom of the steps. His eyes were glossy, though he smiled. I used to think I had lost everything, he said. But you reminded me that miracles still exist. Thank you, Jessica. I nodded. I didn't offer to keep in touch. I didn't ask for anything. That moment was enough. He extended an envelope, one I knew, without opening, held a check. Maybe a grant, maybe a thank you gift. I shook my head gently and placed it back into his hands. Please give it to the clinic in Yakima. They need it more than I do. His brows rose, but he didn't argue. Just folded it slowly and tucked it into his coat. Outside, the sky was already deep navy. Lily ran up to me as I exited, her arms thrown around my waist. You did good, she said, even though your voice got shaky. I laughed. Thanks, kiddo. She held my hand as we walked to the car. On the way home, we stopped for fries and shared a vanilla milkshake, our clothes still too fancy for the diner booth. That night after her bath, we curled up with a picture book about the solar system. Lily loved the planets, especially the gas giants. She turned the page to Jupiter and pointed at it. I think you're like this one. Jupiter, yeah, not the brightest, but the strongest. I smiled, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. You mean not flashy? She nodded. But really, really strong. Like, even when other stuff falls apart, you don't. I kissed her forehead. Good night, my little astronomer. She drifted off to sleep quickly, her hand still resting on the page. I sat there a little while longer, listening to her breathe, thinking about stars, storms, and strength that didn't need to shine to endure. The moving boxes were nearly all unpacked, their flattened shells stacked neatly by the door, waiting for recycling. The new apartment wasn't fancy, but it had sunlight, quiet walls, and a tiny window nook Lily had already claimed as her reading corner. From our third-floor balcony, I could see the schoolyard where she'd start second grade next month. It was only a 10-minute walk, which felt like a luxury after years of crossing half the city to get her to school. I hung the last framed photo on the wall beside her, drawing of the two of us, the one she'd given me when I submitted the paperwork to formally adopt her. I hadn't told many people. No announcement, no speeches. Just a quiet signature and a breath I didn't know I'd been holding finally released. The formality didn't change anything between us, but it felt like closing a chapter the world had kept open for too long. The next morning, a letter came addressed to me in careful cursive. No return address, just a Seattle postmark. I opened it slowly. Dear Jessica, it began. I'm not offering anything you haven't already built on your own. This isn't charity, it's gratitude. If you ever find yourself needing support for Lily's education, your work, your own peace, my door is open. Not because you need it, but because you've given so much without ever asking. Warmly, Edward. I stared at the letter, the paper soft but thick in my hands, like it had been selected intentionally. I didn't need anything from him. Not now. But I folded it carefully and tucked it into my desk drawer anyway beside Lily's birth certificate and the only photo I had of us when she was still a toddler clinging to my leg. By midweek, I was back at the clinic. Nothing dramatic. Just a part-time schedule in the community outreach department and a proposal pending for a new health education series with the university. It felt right, like a rhythm returning. I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't even know where she was. After that night at the party, she had vanished from the press, her face replaced by glossier, newer ones with no connection to scandal. One of the nurses had clipped an article from a local magazine and left it in my mailbox. The headline was simple: "The doctor who chose a child and a neighborhood over prestige." I read it once. Then again. They had gotten some facts wrong, but the tone wasn't condescending. Just curious. Almost tender. The photo was old me crouched beside Lily on the hospital lawn blowing bubbles into the wind while she chased them. I hadn't known it was taken. But there we were, full of joy that had nothing to do with vindication. That evening, Lily and I walked downtown to explore. We stopped by a small corner bookstore that smelled like cedar and dust. In the front window was a poster for a community literacy night, guest speaker Jessica Hartwell, MD. Below it in smaller print: "Learning to listen. Learning to lead." I hadn't approved that tagline, but it made me smile. Lily pressed her nose to the glass and pointed to my name. "That's you." "I know," I whispered, brushing her bangs away from her eyes. "Are you nervous?" "Maybe a little." She thought about that then, said, "You're the boss of your own voice now. Not anyone else's." Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. We went inside. The owner recognized me and waved, gesturing toward the children's section in the back. Lily ran ahead. I lingered a moment longer by the window, watching the reflection of the street behind me blur into the life in front of me. That night, as I tucked her into bed, Lily reached for my hand and said, "Will you still read to me when I'm older?" "Always. Even if I can read better than you, especially then." She giggled, curled into her pillow, and fell asleep before I finished the second page. I sat there for a while, the book resting on my lap, the soft hum of the ceiling fan steady overhead. Peace didn't look like fireworks or headlines or public apologies. It looked like this: a small room with a sleeping child, books on the shelf, and no one else deciding who you were allowed to be. The balloons were swaying gently in the breeze, tied to the edge of the picnic table with little star-shaped ribbons. The park was dotted with parents and kids, but the small patch of grass we had claimed was ours for the day. Lily's 6th birthday. I had asked her what she wanted, and she said cupcakes, juice boxes, and a telescope. Not toys, not glitter. A telescope. I baked the cupcakes myself, imperfectly frosted, but filled with extra chocolate chips. We brought coloring books, sidewalk chalk, and folding chairs that kept sinking slightly into the soil. The sun filtered through the trees, casting soft shadows over everything. It wasn't lavish. It didn't have a theme. But it was full. Edward arrived right as Lily was helping a friend decorate a paper crown. He carried a long box wrapped in navy paper, one of those perfectly knotted silver bows stuck to the top. He greeted me with a quiet smile, his suit replaced by soft khakis and a button-down shirt that looked a little out of place at a kid's party, but it made him no less welcome. He knelt beside Lily and handed her the box. Her eyes widened. "Is this for me?" "It is. You once told me you wanted to see the stars up close." She tore the paper, slowly savoring the reveal. The telescope gleamed under the sunlight. She didn't scream or jump. Instead, she looked at him and said with full sincerity, "Thank you. I'm going to find Jupiter tonight." Edward looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the man he might have been if life had gone differently earlier. Not polished or guarded. Just grateful. Marcus showed up a little later, holding a small wooden box with Lily's name etched into the lid. Inside were hand-carved animal figurines he said he had found at a street fair in Oregon. He stayed on the edge of the group at first, but when Lily ran to show him the telescope, his posture softened. He looked at me and said, "I didn't come as anybody's son this time." "I know," I replied. We stood there in companionable silence as the kids painted rocks and made necklaces out of dry pasta. He didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer explanations. We both knew where the boundaries were now, and more importantly, why they needed to be there. Rachel never came. There was no call, no card, no envelope tucked into the mailbox later. It didn't surprise me. But what did surprise me was how I didn't feel the sting I thought I might. Her absence was no longer a hollow, it was just space. Space I no longer felt responsible for filling. After the party, once the juice boxes were cleaned up and the last kid had been hugged goodbye, Lily sat in my lap under the fading afternoon light. She looked up at me, cheeks sticky with frosting, and said, "Mama, one day I'm gonna tell my friends how you saved Grandpa." I brushed a crumb off her chin and smiled. "Only if you also tell them how I used to get ignored at parties and told to keep my voice down." She blinked. "Why, because it's part of the story." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "You weren't boring. They just didn't see." Exactly. That night, she fell asleep early, exhausted from sugar and sunlight. I carried her to bed, tucked her in, and then walked out to the little balcony with the telescope Edward had given her. I hadn't used one since middle school, but I remembered enough. I aligned the scope, adjusted the focus, and there it was. Jupiter. Dim, steady, powerful. I thought about everything that had happened. The cruel words at that engagement party. The silence that used to follow me into every room. The look on Rachel's face when the truth cracked through the image she had built. And then the look on Edward's when Lily called him Grandpa without hesitation. I had lived many lives. The daughter they overlooked, the sister they disrespected, the woman who refused to disappear, the mother someone else failed to be. And now just Jessica. No titles, no roles borrowed from someone else's vision. A woman with her own name, her own place in the world, and a child who saw her not through obligation but love. When I looked back through the telescope, the sky had shifted slightly. The stars never really stayed still. You just had to learn to follow. If someone had told me that the story would unfold like this, I wouldn't have believed them. That a moment of humiliation would one day ripple into something like redemption. That the man whose son had once looked down on me would one day say I reminded him miracles exist. That the child no one wanted to claim would call me her whole world. But that's the thing about stories. They don't always start with triumph. Sometimes they start with a sneer over dinner. Sometimes with silence at a table where you paid the bill. But if you stay, if you endure, if you believe your voice matters, the story changes. And when it does, it's not just yours. It becomes something others can hold too. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been dismissed until the truth made the whole room fall quiet? Or maybe you were that truth. If your sister's future father-in-law called you his lifesaver, what would you do next? Tell me your story. I'll be listening.